everyone, this is Paul Case of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we take time to discuss Kenpo principles, motions. Sometimes we get into the systems with techniques, forms. We also go to our sister arts. So the law of the fist, Kenpo, encompasses a lot more than just one particular method of Kenpo or system of Kenpo. And we are honored occasionally to have very special people, pioneers in the Kenpo world, the martial arts, and people that have influenced not just hundreds of lives, thousands of lives, but probably millions of lives through their teachings, their contributions, and their participation. Today, we have one of the great teachers. This man has premised his whole life and based it off of teaching. He has a great passion for teaching, but that's based because he had great success, own personal life experiences. So I'm truly honored today to introduce Grandmaster Jerry Smith. Hello, Mr. Smith. How are you?
Hey, Paul. How you doing?
I'm excellent, and I'm truly honored you're on here. You were on a previous discussion with the Hall of Fame on mass attacks, but now we're going to talk about you. So if you, with all due respect to you, I'm going to call you Jerry. Is that all right?
That's absolutely all right, Paul.
Thank you. Let's get into some things about you and your history. I'm going to put on my glasses because, Lord, I have to need them in my old age. My old age. Anyway, it says that Jerry Smith is the former professional full contact fighting coach. We'll address that in a little bit. He is also one of the co-founders of the Black Karate Federation, and he is the founder of 5-level method Shorin-Ju Kenpo. And we're going to discuss all about that. So, Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history, where you were born, where you grew up, and that led to your military life, and as you proudly wear the insignia of the United States Marine Corps, and salute to you and thank you for your service to protect the rights of everyone that lives here. And then finally, your martial arts. So let's talk about your history. Where did you grow up, Jerry?
I was born in a little town, I guess, south of Shreveport, Louisiana, called Minden, Louisiana, in the bayous, don't you know? And my mother moved away from the bayous. She wanted to go to the city, so she moved to Shreveport. And I guess when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and you have to understand, Paul, that this was the segregated South. This was when the Freedom Riders and Martin Luther King and were going through. And I was I think I must have been in the 7th grade. And I told you yesterday that I was going to tell you something that I've never disclosed before that started me on my quest in the martial art. There's something that happened that influenced my whole life. And it was such a negative, horrible thing, but it's led to some really, really wonderful things. It's led me all over the world, basically, in a quest. And that was that. When I was in the 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade, that would have been middle school. And it was the last day of school. And you have to understand that I was raised up in a Southern family. I was my father's youngest son. I was the baby. So I come from a big family, 15 of us. And I was the youngest. So they spoiled me silly. And I knew nothing about fighting or aggression or anything. I was just this really good little boy. It was like, E.T. So what happened was, I had a big head and big eyes, and that was about it. So what happened was, it was the last day of school at J.S. Clark Junior High School. And this group of thugs, and I knew nothing about fighting, you have to understand, and attacked me, and a friend of mine attacked us. These guys just jumped on us and beat the hell out of me. The only thing that saved me is they knocked me out onto a highway, and I ended up on the other side of the highway. But they really beat really bad. And my mom, you know, took me, and remember those movies that you saw where the person's dressed up like a mummy, so wrapped up, one hand,
Oh yeah.
everything. I looked like that. There was nothing left that wasn't beat up. And and I don't know. I must have been 15. No, I wasn't 15. I was much younger than that. So what happened was my whole family was really upset. My mother was crying, and my brother. And I remember my brother put me in his car, Paul, and he drove around the school, and he was trying to get me with a snub nose 45 in his glove compartment. And he was trying to get me to show him the kids that jumped me and beat me so severely. And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't, because I knew, even though I was very young, I knew that if I did that, that he would have probably killed these guys, and it would have been, you know, it would have been. I was smart enough to know that that's not what I was going to. So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't tell him. But I made up in my mind at that time that I was going to be responsible for my own whatever I needed to protect myself. And that started my quest. So I went from this little kid that never fought, know anything about fighting. That next year, I think I was expelled about 3 times for fighting at school. I didn't even care if I lost the fight. I just would, you know, I had this anger inside what they did to me. And that was when I started my quest. I've never told anyone else about this, never written about it or anything, but that started me. And that rage, Paul, that was in me really led to me being a champion, but I really wasn't fighting from a good place. I never sparred. I never sparred. Anytime I entered the ring, it was life and death. And it was because of what happened to me when I was a kid. So once we moved to Shreveport, I remember there was an athletic club across the street. We lived in a shotgun house, basically 3 rooms. You could see right through I don't know if you know about Louisiana shotgun house. You could see right through the front door, straight out through the back door. And most of my brothers were older then and had moved away. So it was me, my mom, and my sister mostly, and me. So what happened was I went over to that athletic club, and I was too little to actually see through the window. So I would get up on the garbage cans in the back, and I could peek through these windows, and they were doing these strange things, but that were fighting, and I wanted to know it. And there was one place downtown Shreveport where you could go. They had a Japanese bookstore, and I remember going to that bookstore and buying Black Belt magazine. I also remember going to that bookstore and buying Bruce Tigner books. You know, Bruce Tigner judo, self-defense, and then one day, because it was integrated, it was segregated, I couldn't go to that club. So I had to figure out another way to learn this. And one day I came home, and Art Linkletter's house party was on. And on Art Linkletter's house party, guess who happened to be on Art Linkletter's house party? It was Grandmaster Ed Parker. Ed Parker was on Art Linkletter's house party with Nick Adams, the actor Nick Adams, and Joe Hines, the writer. And he broke some boards and he did some techniques, and I was transfixed. And all I knew from that point on that I wanted to learn that. And from there, my mother, I guess later, I guess I must have been about 12 or 13 or 14. My mother sent me out to Los Angeles to live with my sister. And I lived in East LA. I lived in a place called Aliso Village, which was the project. Usually when people came from the South and they didn't have a lot, that was one of the only places that you could get a pretty cheap place to live. And the interesting thing about that, the other 2 founders of the BKF, Cliff Stewart and Ron Chappelle, were from South Central LA, and I was from East LA. But if you look at our stories, because all three of us are actually the same age. And eventually we met, and you'll find out about that later. But that was the beginning. And I started to study. Once my sister gave me a small allowance because she'd see how much I loved wanting to study the martial arts. And coming from the South to the projects, it was the most wonderful place in the world. You would think that living in the project would have been bad, but there were Latinos, there were whites, there were anybody, mostly poor people, but it was harmonious and everyone got along really well. It was probably one of the happiest times of my life, comparing where I came from. And my sister gave me allowance, and I started to study karate at All American Karate Federation, which is an offshoot of the Japan Karate Federation. And I absolutely love it. And believe it or not, that is where I met the actor John Saxon. He asked me to spar one day, and I sparred with him, and he was a brown belt, and I think I was a green belt, if not even lower than that. And he liked my my fighting spirit. He goes, "Kid, you're really," but it really wasn't a good fighting spirit. It was like, you asked me to fight, you were going to be in a fight. And this was John Saxon was much older. I was just a kid. And I remember I had to catch 3 buses to get across town to All American. I had to transfer 3 times to get back to where I needed to go. And I was waiting on the bus. This really nice car pulls up, and it's John Saxon. And he says, "Hey, kid." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You need a ride home?" "You need a ride?" He said, "You need a ride." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Where do you live?" I go, "I live in Aliso Village, in East LA, right across the First Street Bridge, right across from Little Tokyo." He says, "Yeah, I'm going that way. Come on, get in. I'll give you a ride." John Saxon was not going that way. He did not live in East LA. I'm sure he lived in Hollywood. He was a movie star. And John gave me, gave me a ride home. And I remember, and now the reason why I'm telling you this is because years later, after I went overseas and studied overseas, got black belt, came back, and working at Black Belt Magazine, I was chosen to do a TV special. John Saxon was the host, and I was the co-host. It was like kind of like on the Tonight Show martial arts. Okay, but there's one thing I have to say, Paul. The reason I, joined the Marine Corps was not because I was crazy about being a Marine. I mean, I love that I am a Marine, and my oldest son also joined the Marine Corps. But I joined the Marine Corps for one reason. I wanted to study the martial arts in the Orient in my head, would have been, the old masters. That's why I joined. It wasn't because I was so in love with the Marine Corps. It was because that was the only way that I could get to the Orient and study. So I joined the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, which is pretty not very smart. I almost, got my full head blown off. But I got a chance to go to Okinawa and got to study with Junkin and others, usually Americans that were on Okinawa in my day, the ones that were crazy like I was, that loved it so much. We studied at more than one place. I know that Joe studied at 3 different places.
That's Joe Lewis, correct?
Yeah, Joe Lewis.
We'll address that in a minute.
Yeah. And went to and I, at that time, the only thing that I was interested in was martial arts. I wanted to become good at it. I'm still on that crazy quest that I was telling you about. I wanted to really, really know how to protect myself. And so what happened was, went to Vietnam. I don't know if you knew it or not. I'm considered a disabled vet now because I was blown up in Vietnam. I got shot down on a helicopter, and I won't go into all of that, but I had both eardrums busted and some other issues. But it was worth it to me. And and you have to understand, I was trying to explain this to you a little bit. I was a mortarman. I dropped small bombs on people, and I was good at it. And I don't know if your kids play Angry Bird. If you've ever seen Angry Bird, I've had my students ask me at my college. They go, "Mr. Smith, what did you do in Vietnam?" I go, "I was a mortarman." They go, "What's that?" I go, "You ever played Angry Bird?" They go, "Yeah." I go, "I was really good at it, you know." And they go, "Oh." And anyway,
So tell me, let me interrupt you there. Tell me about your first teacher, Junkin, and what was the system that he taught?
Junkin taught Shorin-Ju karate, and
Okay.
he eventually came to the States for a little while and had a school here and there. And I remember, because I was at the time I was a fighter. That's when I was winning tournaments and fighting. And I remember taking my trophy because I thought he would be proud of me. But the Japanese and the Japanese way is not to praise you. They just don't. And they and but I remember someone came to our school. That's when, as he had moved, because I was so proud that he was, and I wanted to prove to him that I was a good student and that I loved, and I was doing it for him. But it's real interesting. He never showed any expression. I put the big trophy on his desk, and he just went hype and just really didn't pay any attention to it. Went on with every. And I talked to another person in the class, and I went, "I don't think Sensei, he's I don't think he really." Yeah, he goes, "Jerry, he really does." He said some guy came in here and challenged Sensei, and he goes, "Sensei would have killed the guy, but he's not going to do that." But he could barely speak English, but he knew that you came in on Wednesday night, and he told the guy, "Come back Wednesday, you see Jerry. Come back Wednesday, you see Jerry." And that was when I knew that he really did think well of me. And but back on Okinawa, it was different.
Why is that?
It was different because I was a young Marine, and when we went out to study, when we went out, after classes, you would go with Sensei, and they would tell you stories about the old days, and I was young, and I think I was about 18 or 19. I was hanging on every word, and that's all I did. I lived, breathed martial arts. That's all I wanted. So it was he treated me different on Okinawa than he did once he came to the States. And I remember when you went up for promotion, they had these little bamboo sticks, and every student had one, and they hung on the wall. And that means that was your belt, and that was where, if you were a green belt, if you were and the funny thing about it was, promotion time, it's not like you would go through and you would do your form. They wouldn't say anything. You just look height. But then the next time you came in, if your little piece of bamboo had been moved up to the black belt peg, that means that you passed your test. If it
Oh,
didn't,
nice.
it means that you didn't. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it couldn't have been any better than it was. But
And that in itself sounds so interesting that we could probably spend hours on what is it like, the mindset of a Westerner coming into the Oriental setting of a mindset, and how the differences between the two, and how
well,
we should learn from that.
one thing, Paul, is the fact that I studied Shotokan. I had studied Shotokan before I went in the Marine Corps. Remember, I told you about it with John Saxon, All American Karate Federation. Well, Shotokan is the forms are similar, but they're different because classical Shorin-Ju, the Okinawans used karate to defend themselves because the Okinawans were peasants that were not allowed to even look a samurai in the face. They couldn't even look a samurai in the eye. They could be beheaded for that. So they were farmers. That's why you look at Okinawan weapons. They're based on wagon sports, nunchucks. The size based on the pitchfork, because that is what they use to defend themselves. And the samurai didn't look on the Okinawan people as being as pure, because Okinawa is off from Japan, and a lot of the Asians, a lot of people, a lot from India, a lot of people from different places ended up on Okinawa. So the samurai that were sent to Okinawa to kind of oversee the place and collect taxes, and they really didn't treat the Okinawan people, very well. But the fact that I had studied, in Shotokan, which is deep stances, knee out over the toe, perfect downward block, long. The Japanese are so beautiful. Whatever you give them, they will turn it into the most artful form of it that you can possibly think of. And so here I am on Okinawa, and my instructor pushing my foot up. And when they stand up in their forward stand, it looks like a boxing stand. The legs are not deep. The legs are very close because they actually fought with it. And so one of I just thought it was the most horrible looking. I go, this is not the way this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be deep.
But you found out, huh? Did you find out?
Yeah,
Soon enough.
But the funny thing is, the style Shotokan actually comes from Okinawa. I was studying the first form of my, because Funakoshi took karate from Okinawa to Japan and made it very deep and graceful and beautiful, and whereas the Okinawa, it's not that way. It's very, very basic, and that's just a little side note that I thought I would throw in.
So how were you received by this Okinawan instructor? Here it is, you're an American, you're a Westerner coming into a school. How did you approach him? And he said, okay, you can study with me. Or did somebody go before you?
Well, most of the guys that we were the Americans. There's a Japanese, there's a military base on Okinawa. And these people were, they weren't rich people. And also, one thing I remember about is that what they wanted, I was told by the black belts that were always there, $5 or $10, what it was for a month. Can you imagine it being that cheap? And but you gave Sensei a gift. You would give him the $5 or $10 or whatever it was, but you would also give him a carton of cigarettes and a box of washing powder, Tide washing powder or whatever. And I could never figure out what the hell does Sensei want with this washing powder and these cigarettes. And a lot of the older they were smokers.
Sure.
But I realized years later, after I figured out, someone told me that you weren't the only person that was giving them cigarettes and washing powder. So they probably had a little black market going on the side.
Even though they were wearing white jeans.
Yeah, I'm serious. That's the way they, trying to make a living as a martial arts instructor, they needed to make. But how
many years were you with him, with Mr. Kina?
I was with Mr. Kina for 1 year, and then I came back to America, and then I was with him for longer because he came over and tried to make it, but it didn't work out. He eventually went back. But the funny thing about Okinawa is when Americans were there, especially Americans like myself and Joe, we were kind of on a accelerated program. I mean, every minute that I wasn't working or on base, I was in the dojo studying and practicing and doing what I needed to do. I think Joe got his black belt in about 6 months. And I was a little bit longer than that, but not a, you know, we weren't there for years or anything.
Sure.
But
Well, you also trained with obviously John Chambers. Tell us about Mr.
oh
Chambers.
my goodness, I'm so happy that you asked me that, because this man, John Chambers, was the secretary of the Korean Judo Federation. He looked just like Ricky Nelson, and he was this really wonderful, sweet guy. And actually, the first tournament I studied judo and jujitsu with John Chambers, and this is when I was, pretty young. And the first tournament I ever won was not a karate tournament. It was a judo tournament. And this is before jujitsu became judo and jujitsu became as popular as it is now. And I actually placed, I think I played first or second in a judo tournament, which was horrible for me because I was tall with long, skinny legs. And whenever I would try to load someone up with a judo throw, all they had to do, Paul, was put their finger on top of my head and just press down. And I would look, because I would have to get so low to try to load them up. And but that jujitsu and that judo that John Chambers taught me have saved my life several times, because of the nature of it. I know you're a jujitsu guy, so you probably know what I'm talking about.
Sure. Well, you look at it right now, the flavor seems to be in mixed martial arts that everybody thinks that. But really, when you think about it, your training, Mr. Parker's training, and most of the people that are out there have been doing mixed martial arts for a long time. They just call it whatever it is to reference their system of understanding. And really, when you get down to, and we'll talk about this, I think the process with the teachers that you have, Mr. Kina, Mr. Chambers, and we'll talk about Mr. Lewis in just a second, collectively, they all brought something that was very personal to their journey. And it didn't mean that you might adapt it, but you may learn from it, and thus it will help you on your path.
Well, the funny thing is, the reason why I blended my system, the Shorin-Ju was from the Shorin-Ru. The Shorin was from the Shorin-Ru. The Ju was for the Jiu-Jitsu and John Chambers. And the Kenpo was from Bob Leonard, because I had to study Kenpo because I worked for Bob Leonard when I was in the Marine Corps, and I got a chance to actually, that's where I met Joe.
Well, explain something about Bob. What was his background, and what was the form? The Kenpo, people have a tendency, they don't understand what the word Kenpo means.
Bob Leonard is now a 10th degree black belt in the Tracy system. He studied with Jim and Al Tracy.
Okay.
And a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful human being. I wandered in his studio one day when I was stationed in the Marine Corps, and dragging people out of bars. I was an MP. And the fact that I didn't have to be on base anymore because I worked out of the brig, in my off time, I could teach karate. And in order to teach for Bob, I had to learn everything that you had to learn. All those, probably a little bit different because we learned under different instructors, but long form, short forms, all of and I hate to tell you this, and don't ever I'm glad no one else is listening but me and you.
We'll go here later.
I really loved Kenpo. I loved it more than the hard styles that I had the pleasure of studying. And it was, I loved the self-defense aspect of Kenpo. I just loved it. And I don't think I've ever admitted that to anyone before.
So now that we know, let's go, obviously you're paying tribute to your teachers, which will influence you as a teacher later on.
I really didn't know if you knew that I was a Kenpo guy or not. I really didn't.
Yeah, I did.
I knew
but I
you
bet
knew
you tell us.
I knew you knew that I studied with a bunch of Kenpo guys, but I didn't know you knew that I had a Kempo background. But my background did not come through Steve Saunders and those guys.
Sure, sure.
My Bob Leonard.
Yeah, so let's go now. Let's go to the third influential person in your martial arts journey and training was the great world champion Joe Louis. Tell us about your relationship with him, what you learned.
Oh my goodness, man. If it wasn't for Joe Louis, I don't think that martial arts would have kept me. I would have, I would have had a black belt because when I met him, I was a black belt, and he considered me one of his black belt once Joe Louis sent a lot of top fighters back in the day to me. He sent Jeff Smith to me. He sent Jack Hung. He sent, because Joe taught me that I was one of Joe's first private students in the 60s, and he was always moving around and doing seminars and what have you. And he met this crazy little guy in Long Beach, little MP, and he just loved it, and plus I could take what he gave me, and actually he could see me do it. He could actually, probably the biggest compliment I could give him was to go out and win with what he showed me. That changed everything for me, because his way of teaching me was to look at martial arts holistically, instead of monkey see, monkey do. Like, just do what we say and don't ask any questions. It was just the opposite. He goes, no. I remember the first lesson I took with him up in Laurel Canyon at Nathaniel Brandon's place. He asked me, Joe said, I asked him, I go, you're really a world champion in Bob Leonard's studio? And he goes, yeah. And I go, will you teach me? He goes, I heard you're in the Marine Corps. I go, yeah, I was. He goes, you study on blah, blah, blah. You study it? I go, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'll teach you. And I said, how much are you going to charge me? He says, I normally charge $100 a lesson. This is when he was working on The Wrecking Crew, one of the, those Matt Helm movies, when he was trying to get into the movies with Bruce Lee and everybody else. And I'm saying, Joe, I go, you're going to charge me $50 a lesson? I said, we only paid $10 at the most on Okinawa. He goes, you're not on Okinawa anymore. And so I went up to Nathaniel Brandon, and I wanted to show Joe that my Okinawan forms, that I knew. I got very deep, and I was showing him my move, dropping my hands in the right. And he said, you know what? He goes, what? He said, if you do that, if you fight here in America in that stance, he said, I would sidekick you completely cross onto the other side of the pool. He said, you're too immobile. Bring those legs up. He was pretty much, he goes, stand up straight. Come on, come on, now you're mobile, you can move. So and all of a sudden he started to teach me the 25 basic fighting principles. And I did not know, and this is another little tidbit I want to drop on you. I did not know that Joe was studying with Bruce Lee at the time. And so how much of this comes from Bruce and how much it comes from Joe, I'll leave that up to speculation. But I learned from Joe. And just the way that he taught me, he said, look, if you truly want to be a champion, you're going to have to change everything. You have to change your diet. You're going to have to build up certain muscle groups, the pushing muscle, the fast twitch muscle. I mean, he really broke it. That wasn't what? I mean, all of a sudden, this amazing information that he was sharing with me, and not just telling me, look at me and do what I do. He was actually sharing information with me and saying, look, if you do this, this is a method. A method applies to everything. A kick is a kick and a punch is a punch. One person might punch like this, a person might punch another way. He said, you have the physical. What happened is I finally took that and broke it down, those 25 basic fighting principles, and broke them down into 5 basic methods and that was the physical method. Under the physical, you have cardio, you have diet, you have muscle group, you have all the physical aspects. For instance, Paul, if a person came to me and he's 350 pounds and out of weight, overweight, first I got to work on his physical level. I got to get him in shape so he can learn. So so the physical level, you have the mechanical level, the technical level. The technical level is the technique, whether the technique, the kick, punch, block, strike, their technique. And then you have the mechanical level. The mechanical level is the execution of the technical level. In other words, I can hit you with a left hook, but if I throw it the right way, I'll probably break my wrist. So there's a level of acceptability on the way that punches, kicks, mechanically are thrown. Then you have the academic level. The academic level is all knowledge combined. Let's say maybe you were a wrestler, maybe you studied jujitsu, maybe you were a boxer. The academic level brings in all of that. And then you have the psychological level, which is really one of the most important ones.
Yeah, we addressed that during the mass attack, the mindset. Mr. Parker had that in his first book, the Infinite Insights. He talked about the 8 preparatory considerations, and he talked about things like your awareness, environment, range, weapons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about that for long and hard, and then I came up with an idea some time ago where I broke it down into 4 sections instead of working that hard at it. I wanted it to be more palatable, because when you get down to too much material, it's very difficult. So let's concise it down. You're going to take a class in, say, calculus. If you take a class in calculus, you'll have breakdowns of all these different principles and whatnot, and then it's collectively called calculus. Or reading, writing, and arithmetic, as we grew up as little boys and girls. My idea was, first of all, was the awareness stage. You have to be aware that once you leave your sanctuary, be it your house, your car, your business, whatever you're in, bad things can happen to you. And I don't mean people attacking you. It could be a bad incident where somebody is a car accident, or you could have a slip and fall because you encountered an area that you didn't perceive it to be wet, or there was a hole. Things can happen to you. I mean, holy mackerel. I mean, when Dorothy landed in The Wizard of Oz, she landed on that witch. Well, that witch wasn't expecting that, so it could happen, okay?
Oh,
second thing is you have to have a mindset that says, listen, pal, collectively this is. The second thing is, am I going to die or am I going to live? And if you choose to live, you better take that really hard and fast, because if you choose the other one, you're going to die. And that's what's going to happen. Now, it may not happen immediately. You give the example of the individual that's overweight. He is slowly killing himself. And when it came to the situation that he's presented with health issues in front of doctors, or he has a heart attack because of poor diet or lack of training, it is inevitable. We all will pass on, and our energy will go to the next level, as Mike Stone is telling me. We're here under love and life. But then the third thing is a plan. And that means your training comes into play, your techniques, your academics. You're studying with Grandmaster Smith, and you go, he's teaching. You can't be there, but you can influence him. The last one is easiest. Execution. Ye who hesitates, meditates in a horizontal position, Ed Parker used to say. You don't. He said, if you're going to get in, you get all the way in. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Well, in the 25 basic fighting principles, one of the principles is called point of view. Point of view. Forward center. That was just so much. It was just like getting a master class in fighting. Yeah.
Point of view is interesting. Mr. Parker used that term a lot back in the early 60s. He called it my point of view, Jerry's point of view, and the people watching point of view. And that's how he saw it. And he broke it down into that analogy. And today it's even more so now with people with cell phones, and they'll record what's going on. And then, as you know, that doesn't always reflect truth.
Well, he would uh, he would say, now think, this person has taught me about distance, about timing, independent movement, hyperextension, all these wonderful. This I wouldn't be in, because I think martial arts wouldn't be as interesting to me if I had not studied with him. I would have been in it. I would have got a black belt, but I would have went on. But for what this man showed me, and his approach holistically changed my life, honestly, because those same principles apply to everything, business, everything else that you could do and want to be successful at. You're going to apply the same principles to them. And he had this one thing where he would say, I'm going to ask you guys, ask you a question. Guess what? He said, I'm gonna set up. He says, I'm gonna say, here's the guy. He studied classical karate. Doesn't matter which style. He goes to the dojo. He studies, 3 hours. He does his forms and his concepts. And they say, here's another guy. He's a street fighter. You know what I mean? He's a street fighter. He fights in the street, fights in bars. And he's pretty good at it. He's won most of his street fights. And he would say, his point of view is to kill you, pretty much. He says, who would you put your money on? Be a bunch of us black belts sitting around. Everybody goes, oh, the black belt knows. And he would go, no, 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 no. Remember, this black belt, even though he's doing his form and he's doing his thing, he hasn't really fought that much. There's street fighter over there fight there Friday night with bars and bottles and bars and everything else. He says, don't be fooled. He says, the guy with the correct point of view, is the guy that will probably win the fight. And I never forgot that.
Beautiful. Let's move on. So you're in your training, and you've been, you're back in the States, and you're now involved with tournament competition. Just give us an overview quickly of your tournament success and whatnot. I know I'm going to read something right off the bat. Okay. And I want our listeners to listen on it. And, it says closely here, it said, you were not only a world champion, you were a 3-time international champion in semi-contact karate. You're also a trainer of world-rated full contact fighters. And you're also one of the individuals involved with Mike Stone's events and such. So tell us a little bit about the tournament scene for you. Just give us an overview.
Yeah. Well, after, it's so wonderful, man, because, as you know, you've heard about my bar fights when, in Long Beach. That was my job, working as an MP and a naval investigator, keep breaking up the fights between sailors and Marines. And eventually I became an investigator where I didn't have to work in the bars anymore. But I really didn't know how to tournament fight. But what Joe gave me, what this man gave me, I immediately just, read up within the top 3. I was regionally rated by Black Belt Magazine in the top 5 in my weight division. And some of the best fights I ever had would always end up with me and Benny Urquidez going at it. And man, I love the guy. It was just the fact that I got to fight this guy was really great. And I don't like to talk about my wins. I don't remember many losses, but I don't like to talk about, because then you're saying that. Sure. But I won. But I. Well, did.
let's focus on the lessons learned that you can share with your students. That's the important thing. They already know you're a champion.
Well, the funny thing is was this. Because of what happened to me, was what I started our conversation with. My fighting came from a bad place, and I never sparred. And it worked out for me because I won almost all the fights that I had. And I wouldn't do anything. I wasn't as fast as Steve. I wasn't as big as Cliff Stewart. But I didn't win. I didn't lose any fights because I would do whatever it took. I was willing to die in the ring to win my fight. And that was, but it wasn't, but Paul, I say again, and I got through it. I mean, I got to a point where I figured it out, and I realized, and I guess that's why I stopped fighting. I realized that I could take what was given me and give it to others, to other young fighters, and enjoy their winning as much as I did winning myself. I guess I did it. I was very good at it, but I was never caught up on it. So it was easy for me to, I think I got more pleasure out of teaching others, teaching other young, gifted, talented fighters to fight, giving them these principles and teaching them these things. That was everything to me. And I guess I was always a better teacher than I was anything else.
Well, I don't know about that. There's a few people that said he was pretty damn good. Let's talk about that then. Okay, so in the late 60s, one of the most formidable, inspirational, iconic group of men got together to form a legendary style or system or group of fighters, and that was the Black Karate Federation. And that was created with you, Ron Chappelle, and Cliff Stewart in the late 60s.
Yes.
Actually, I think it was 1969 is what you had told me.
You're absolutely right about that.
So we're over 52 years ago.
Yeah.
52 years ago. And think of the legacy that has gone on from that. So it went on, and because of its influence and impact, and I want to make sure that people understand the importance of the BKF, because I had a firsthand experience of it in 1978 when I fought at Frank Trejo's tournament. I think it was November something of 1978. I met Frank Trejo and I met Ed Parker that day. But the funny thing is that I had fought earlier than I had met Mr. Parker, and it was a BKF guy. And needless to say, I lost because I wasn't familiar with that kind of fighting style. There's lessons in that. So anyway, you've got and you formulated the BKF, the Black Karate Federation, and the premise of it was formed in 1969. Tell us a little bit about that story, how that was created, and what was the goals.
I'm going to tell you because I it's so funny. I've actually seen videos of people talking about how the BKF was formulated, and it's totally they didn't know anything they were talking about. They were just making it up. I don't know what they would think talking about. I've heard all these, but I want to tell you how.
Set us straight, sir. Set us straight.
Yeah. What happened was, I was still in the Marine Corps, stationed in Long Beach. I came to a tournament, and this is a long, nasty story. I'll show that.
Let's go to the highlights. How'd you meet?
The highlights were years earlier, back in the days when you would go dojo hopping. That's what we called it, where you would go in very respectful to a dojo and sit there, and then after class you would say, "Does anyone spar here? Is it okay if I come on too?" And if it was a competitive school, they would say, "Yeah." If they weren't, they'd go, "No, we're not allowed to spar." But one of these schools I went to, and a bunch of young purple and orange and blue belts were there. These purple, orange, and blue belts later on, years later, became my students and became professional fighters. But then here's this crazy guy coming into their school and challenging their instructor, and I kind of, the instructor got the worst of it. And I guess those kids never, I wasn't even thinking about them, but I guess they remembered that. Okay, 4 years later, when I come back from the Marine Corps and I go to this tournament, those guys were black belts, and they had won their little divisions, and they came up and they attacked me at the tournament. They attacked me, and I'm fighting these 3 or 4 guys, and that's what I did then. That was my job, was fighting crazy people. So it wasn't, I wasn't, Cliff said it, he said, you look like you're enjoying yourself, but you look like you needed a little help out, trying to fight all those guys. So Cliff Stewart jumped in, and and we ended the fight really quick. And then he invited me over to Cliff and Ron Chappelle were going to UCLA. They were film students. They were studying film at UCLA. Cliff got his degree in film from UCLA. So they invited me over, this crazy Marine. I remember they were, when I went to their place, so they were roommates. I remember they had all these weapons. They had crossbows, they had, guns, and they had, this was in the 60s, they had all these, and I was the fact that I just got back from the war, I was going, these guys are young, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They shouldn't have all this, somebody could get hurt, and and they were asking me crazy questions about, oh, did you, like young guys will, hey, you ever killed anybody? You ever dropped, I'm going like, I didn't know if I really wanted to hang out with these guys. But anyway, they were great guys. And we started to work out in the park. And we found out that there were other Black schools found out that we were working out in the park. They would come to the park and we would all work out together. And I came to a conclusion. I said, hey, I go, Cliff, I go, what? I said, when we in a tournament, most of our guys lose by fighting each other. I said, if we were under a school, we don't have to have a school, but if we say we have a school and all these people are our students, they would not have to fight each other until the finals. They might, you could say, oh, I can't fight him. And the way they worked it back in those days, you may end up fighting somebody for your, from your school, but it would be in the finals, not in the beginning. You wouldn't just, so one of the main reasons why we started the BKF was that reason. And it was really, and one of the great things about the BKF is Cliff Stewart came from Goju and Hapkido. Ron Chappelle came from Akwang and at the time. And me, Shorin, and that was before Steve had even joined with us. Steve Saunders, Steve Mohammed now, as you would call him, joined us, and he was more well known than the rest of us. So Steve Saunders, we made Steve Saunders the first president of the BKF. I was the first vice president of the BKF, and I am now the president of the BKF. But that was the reason why we started it, and the fact that if you were in the BKF, you could go and study with Cliff, you could go study with Ron Chappelle, you could go study with Jerry Smith, you could go study with Steve Mohammed, and the fact that we had all these different styles that we could combine, our students, we start to win everything, the best kick, the best punching, the best strike, and that different style of fighting that you say you saw that you weren't ready for, it was because of that, because the students got a chance to study with a lot of different instructors if they chose to.
Yeah, in Pasadena, I was training with Trejo. A lot of fighters, Frank was very big advocate of the boxing principles, angles, off, shoot, and counter punch and such, which you see with Benny, and obviously you probably, with my situation, I was a green belt at the time, so I hadn't really got into that. And because of that fight that I lost, the individual I fought was very linear. He was just straight, went like a buzzsaw right at me, and just boom, 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 boom. And I was, oh my God. And, and because of that, when I left, I had the discussion with Trejo, and he said to me, you have skill, and I know you're an instructor, but you know why you lost? And he addressed the first thing that you talk about in your 5-level method, mindset, your mindset. He said, don't get in the ring if you ain't ready. Basically, the metaphor of life. If you're not prepared to walk out of this house and deal with adversity and be aware of what's bad out there, you're going to end up a casualty or fatality or a statistic, and that's not good. So because of Frank Trejo and seeing that, and because of that great experience that I lost, and by the way, I felt like I went to the butcher and he was taking slices of ham and going to my head. Yeah, I think, thank God
Oh,
it's enough ham for me, baby. So
yeah.
I learned about that. So then when I fight those guys now, it's a lot different.
Mhm.
First rule is I run. Okay. If I have to stay, I stay. So it was amazing that you brought up this because the the mindset of the BKF was very formidable, combat all the way. And
Oh, yeah.
it was right there. We're going to win. And I thought that's really important. So what other principles, what was the goals of the BKF in the initial part
Well, the
years when it did?
over
And then it gravitated to, well, let me strike that question. It goes, because of the BKF and the success of it, you had a school. And that school, the first school that you ever had, if I can read this correctly, was called hold on, let me get to this. In 1971 at 10302 South Western Avenue in Los Angeles, known as the
yeah,
103rd Street School. Tell us about
yeah.
that.
Well, the 103rd Street School was in, I mean, that was way out there, and it was in a tough neighborhood. But that was the first school that we had. Oh, wow, we have a school that we can go to. And from that school, we ended up with the Crenshaw School, which was in the Crenshaw district, which was really elite school. And something happened where, um, notice that my school was West LA Karate Institute. It wasn't BKF school. And I did that purposely because when we started the BKF, the way that it was supposed to be is each instructor, each of us would have a school, and it would just be, you know, BKF school, blah blah blah. But no one's name was supposed to be on the school. It wouldn't be Sanders BKF or Committee BKF or Cliff Stewart B. It was supposed to be. So when that happened, I decided that I would still accept all the BKF students, but I couldn't go along with that. But that was because that wasn't the way that the BKF was an umbrella, and under that umbrella was these different schools. And I created West LA Karate Institute and started to teach uh, full contact. It was during the era where full contact started. And most of the guys that wanted to explore that came to my school. Still, you know, but not only BKF people, you know, the Steve Fishers, the other fighters would come and study because there was only three places that you could study in those days if you wanted to go into full contact. One was their Eukides camp, one was my camp, and the other one was Hap Holloway, one of Jim Kelly's students. And so
Let me ask you this, just to dispel any false sense of understanding. The BKF was just not limited to Black martial artists.
oh no 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 no. There, that it's funny because there's one guy, I don't really know his name because I'm right. Even though I'm the president of the BKF now, and that was chosen. What happened was, I'll tell you this. What happened was, I had moved to Northern California, and I think it was Casey Jones and Sam Pace and a few other guys came up and said, "Look, Jerry, Steve had moved to Atlanta, and he started his own style, and we are old BKF guys, and we want to know if you will." And I was kind of reluctant because you know, it was years later, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. But and he said that. Well, I said, well, what happened? He said, you know, there's so many guys in the BKF now, and we know that if we go and say Casey Jones and Sam Pace are going to start going to redo the West Coast BKF, make it nonprofit, and a whole bit. And he said, we knew there would have been fist fights. People would have been throwing grenades. It would have been terrible in this big meeting that we had. So when we went into the meeting, we kind of, even before we told you, we told them that, okay, be careful restructuring. Jerry Smith just moved back from Northern California. And he said, he could hear the grumbling, and he said, Jerry is going to be the new, since he was one of the founders, president. He was the first vice president. He's going to be the president of BKF. Cliff Stewart and Ron Chappelle will be vertical. They will be vice president, both of them. And they said that everybody looked at each other and went, okay. They went, okay, we can accept that. That's great. No fight, no punches, no anything. And for the last 5 or 6, 7 years, that's the way it's been.
You're a worldwide organization now, correct?
Absolutely.
How many countries is the BKF in?
You know, I wish that Casey Jones and Sam Pace was here, because they have, I'm a figurehead, man. They chose me because they knew that they wouldn't have to fight everybody. You wouldn't have to, you know, they could stop all the squabbling. Everybody would agree on me. But there is BKFs in Africa. There are BKFs in the Bahamas, and probably some other places that I don't even know about. But yes, it is international.
You know, it's great. It's a great testimony to the dreams and ideas of men that want to do better for the community, especially the martial arts community. And as I told you before, it's very difficult when egos are involved, but when you get an idea and you can bring a community together, you'll find more things that are similar than different, and the goal of why you went into the martial arts. So by 1974, though, you get approached to work with as an illustrator for Black Belt magazine, and a guy named John Corcoran.
Yes.
And you're working together. All right. So now let's get into Black Belt magazine. What an amazing publication. Its influence. Tell us about working for Black Belt magazine, sir.
Well, I go taking a short jump back to the late 60s, when I was training with Joe and learning all this wonderful stuff. Joe got me a school, had Jim and Al give me a school in Arlington, Virginia. Jerry Pennington got one in another part of Virginia, but beautiful school. And I was back there for a couple of years, and I came back with a wife, went back and married a gal from back there. And I realized that Ron and Cliff were already in college, that I needed to go back to school and prepare myself to do something else besides martial arts. So I went to school, and I was a design major. And when you're a design major, a lot of people don't understand when you say that. There's graphic design, there's interior design, there's product design. You have to take all of the design classes that you could possibly think, and get a degree in graphic design, illustration, and computer graphics. So I think I had won a tournament or something. I don't really remember, but I was up at the magazine, and Mito just happened to come by, and see
Please
me.
explain who Mito is.
Mito Uehara is the owner of Black Belt magazine.
Okay.
Owner, publisher, whatever you want to call him. A true samurai, I must say, honestly. And he came back and talked to me, and he kind of take a liking to me, and he said, he goes, yeah, I'll tell you what there, Jerry, you got my name. He says, when you graduate, I think I was 2 years in, he says, when you graduate, he said, come see us. He goes, what are you studying? I said, I'm studying, design, graphic design, illustration. And he goes, come see us. He said, we could use you. We could use another, designer here. And I went, okay. So the day, Paul, after I graduated, I took my portfolio and my resume, and that's when Black Belt magazine was on Wilshire Boulevard. I went in a high ride. I went to Black Belt Magazine. They opened the door. I go in on the elevator, go up, get off, come in. And I remember the Japanese receptionist says, "Yes, how can I help you?" I said, "I'm here to see Mr. Uehara." She goes, "Do you have does he know that?" And I go, "No, but he told me when I graduate to come see him." And just so happened, Dick Hennessy was coming out of his office. Dick Hennessy was the old publisher, was the old art director. And Dick comes out and goes, "Jerry," and I go, "Hi," and he goes, "What?" And he goes, and the young girl said, "He's here to see Miss Mito, but he doesn't have an appointment." And so Dick started laughing because Dick loved to get things on Mito. He loved to push Mito to where Mito didn't quite understand something enough. And it was 2 years later, 4 years if you want to count the two I was doing. It was 2 years later. And he went and knocked on Mito's door. Boom, boom, boom. "Mito." "Yeah." He goes, "Can I talk to you for a second?" He goes, "Yeah. I got a young man out here. I don't know if you remember or not. His name's Jerry Smith." He said, "You told him to come and see you when he graduates." Ta-da, here he is. And Mito looked at me, and I could tell when Mito was looking at me that he didn't remember any of this. Yeah, I could just see in his eyes, like, what the hell? You know, and he goes, and he said, but he was not going to be outdone. He was not going to be outdone. He goes, "Well, okay, young man." He goes, "Dick, why don't you take Jerry back and show him where he's going to be working?" He never looked at my resume. He never looked at my portfolio. And Dick just taught me back, and Dick was laughing Dick Hennessy was laughing all the time. He takes me back and goes, "Jerry," and I'm Mark Kimura, all the people that were already there. And years later, Mito told me, he goes, "You know what, Jerry? He used to put on these martial arts expos at the sports arena, and we would do the design, and John and I would do the commercials for the martial arts expos." And he would say, "You know what, Jerry?" I go, "What?" He goes, "You know what?" He goes, "You're the first guy to ever work at this magazine that didn't have a portfolio or a res." I go, "Mito, I had a portfolio and a resume, but you never asked me to look at them. You just sent me back to go to work." And that was and I loved it because working there, I got to see everybody who was anybody in the martial arts at the time. I knew most of them from tournaments, but people would come from all over the world to go to Black Belt Magazine.
Sure.
And at that particular time, people would call Black Belt Magazine for directors and movie stars would call because they would want a private instructor they want. And Mito would always say he loved it because he had a magazine called Stars in Sports. I don't know if you remember that magazine.
No, but I do Fighting Stars.
Yeah, Fighting Stars. Thank you.
Well, it's funny is that for an illustrator, you had a very illustrious career. And you look at the things that you were involved with here, like besides black belt, you did Inside Kung Fu. Yes. I was present when Mr. Parker shot the cover of that in '79.
Yeah.
Professional karate, Karate Illustrated, and Fighting Stars. And that leads me to somebody else who had a conversation with earlier today. And the book was, it was funny. It was called The Ultimate Martial Arts Q&A book that was in there, that was written by John, as we had spoken before. But you had one with a guy that was the who's who of martial arts. And you were featured in it in 1970. I'm not sure if it's 74 or 75. And he said he always fantasized that he had a fight with you and he beat you up. But he said there is life after death. He said, so I didn't think it was a good idea.
Who was this? You got to tell me who this is.
Bob Wall.
Are you serious?
Yes. Mr. Wall says hello to you today.
Oh, thank you. There's so many Bob Wall stories. That's great.
We'll address those at a different time, but he just wanted I just wanted to share that with you. I thought that was very kind of him.
I love, and I want Bob to know that I consider his book. I've been in many books since then, and who's who books and what have you, the halls of fame. But I will tell you, tell you right now, that book meant everything to me because I was still a pretty young man, a fairly young man, and to be in that book, with Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, and all those guys, and the fact that they even considered me to be in that book, that little book means everything to me, Paul, everything to me.
Well, he was happy to tell me that, and I wanted to
Yeah.
share that with you. So we'll address some of the people that you met through Black Belt Magazine. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of interest in them because they were, subjects to important, influential lessons in the martial arts.
Yeah.
And that's really quite easy. And that leads us then to the final thing we'll talk about you and your system of the 5-level method of Shorin-Ju Kenpo. We'll get back to that in a minute. But let's talk about, so you're working in Black Belt Magazine. And who would be the ones that really stood out to you in your time there?
Well, Bruce Lee would be because Bruce Lee would come up to, when he came to Black Belt Magazine, it was Bruce Lee Day when Bruce Lee came up to, because all the girls would be hanging out of the office. Everybody was just like, he was such a presence when he came. And you could hear him talking to Mito in his office. And he was just a very charismatic guy, And they would be talking about this, that, the other, different instructors, how he felt about them. And I remember Bruce came up, but Mark Kimura was the art director after Dick Hennessy passed away. And Mark Kimura is a Japanese guy from East LA, from the same project area that I was from. And if you were to talk to Mark on the phone, you would think Mark was a black guy because that's what he sounded on the phone. He went to Roosevelt High School, but he was an incredible graphic designer and artist, and taught me a lot. And whenever Bruce came up, everybody would stop working, and Mark didn't really care that much about martial arts. He didn't think he was, he didn't care. So Mark would never stop working. He would just keep working. So whenever Bruce would come in, he would look, and Mark wouldn't even turn around. Mark would just keep working. Everybody else is like, oh, Bruce Lee's there. So down in the basement where they kept all the books and shot the covers, Bruce was going down with Mito. Because believe it or not, that Bruce Lee, Mito Uehara was Bruce Lee's private student, and so they had a heavy bag, and they had, that's where we shot. So everybody left and went down to the basement to see Bruce Lee show us some stuff. And Mark, when I go, Mark, come on, and Mark, I'm not going down. That little guy, blah blah blah. What? I go, Mark, come on, let's go. So Mark comes down. So as soon as Mark walks in the door, we walk in, everybody's already there. Bruce Lee looks over at Mark and go, oh, Mark Kimura. How that, he kind of like made a little like, oh, fine, you come to, and he goes, Mark, come here. I want to show you something. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to help me. I'm trying to teach Mito how to do this particular kick. And I want you to, he's old, he's old, but I want, you young guy, I want you to hold this bag for me. So Mark grabs the bag. Bruce Lee does a skip side kick and kicked Mark. I swear to you, he was airborne halfway across the room into a bunch of boxes. And everybody was just like, oh my goodness. And so when I went back upstairs, I go, Mark, what did you think? Mark goes, Jerry, that little guy is really powerful. And I just remember that being one incident. But
did you have any personal discussions with Bruce Lee?
Bruce Lee was this is interesting. I got a chance to see Bruce Lee on several occasions. I never got a chance to actually sit and talk to Bruce Lee. But I remember we were at the Elks Lodge, and Chuck Norris and John the Tividet, everybody was there. Mr. Parker was there. and little kids were running around with their getting their magazines and their programs signed by different people. But I noticed that none of the little kids would go up to Bruce Lee. Carried himself in a way that was very, very, he was kind of
Aloof.
yeah. But he was letting off an energy to where people didn't, even people who normally would go up and say, hey, Mr. Lee. With Bruce, they just sit back and looked at him. Nobody went up much and said a bunch to him.
I'm guessing this is after his time with the Green Hornet. And
Yeah, it was.
yeah.
It was. But and I remember when like I said, when I studied with Joe, and then when the Bruce Lee craze came in, I asked Joe Louis about Bruce Lee. I remember I said, Joe, and he goes, yeah. I said, is Bruce Lee? I gave him a silly question, and Joe looked at me and said, Bruce Lee got a problem. And I never asked Joe Louis another question about Bruce Lee for another 15 years, because it was obvious that the way that he told me, it wasn't, he didn't, it wasn't like, he just said, look, Bruce Lee's got a problem. But the way he said it to me, he really didn't want me to be asking him about Bruce Lee. And I found out later, years later, he explained to me why, which I will not. It's just private. I won't.
Well, there's no purpose of that other than that. Well, let's move
Yeah.
on. So you're
Yeah.
also at there. Bruce is not the only person that sold a magazine cover for Black Belt magazine. So let's talk about some of the other people. You spent some time with people like Chuck Norris,
Mm-hmm.
and etc. Who else would be the individuals that we would recognize immediately that you might have had some interaction
Well, are you talking about movie stars or martial arts?
with? Martial artists, not movie stars, because Black
Okay.
Belt magazine was supposed to be based on martial artists.
Yeah. No. I'm sorry.
Let's keep it there.
That. Yeah. I mean, Dan Ivan, Tuck Kubota. It's funny when John Conklin and I both started at Black Belt magazine, we were told that there were 3 people that would never be in the magazine, and those people was, and there's a reason for this. Oh man, I'm giving up some little secrets here, and I have to, because it'll sound funny if I don't. And those people were the Tracy brothers, Heidi Taka Nishiyama, which I never could understand because they were Japanese, just like Mito. And the third one was Joe Louis. Joe Louis was banned from Black Belt magazine for about 10 years. And he was, after the magazine was sold, I think they finally brought him back. But that was a reason. And Joe told me the reason why he was banned. Letting up some secrets here, some top secrets. You remember when Universal machines came out? Universal weight machines?
Yes, sir.
They were before knotless machines. So Joe Louis was the first white guy to ever be on the cover of Black Belt magazine. He looks like he's doing some spark fluid, but he was the first. And so they were going to do a cover with him. And but what they wanted to do is, Joe, we want to see your workout. Well, from what I understand, Mito had planned with Universal weight machine to have a story done on Joe Louis, and then he would sell ads to Universal weight machine. And but someone told Joe not to do it because Mito was going to make a bunch of money off of selling ads with that, once they run the article with him doing his workouts and then being a world champion. And so Joe Louis turned down and said, no, I'm not going to do it. But I got to tell you, you know who told Joe not to do it? Bruce Lee told you not to do it. He goes, Joe, don't do that. And Joe explained to him why. I mean, Bruce explained to him why. And that never, so this is an inside thing, but I'm just telling you what I know. And,
Sure.
So, so then Mito hit him with that old, you'll never work in this town again thing. It's like, you'll never be in this magazine again. But it didn't hurt Joe's career, that other magazine.
Sure. You know what? Let's talk about Fumio Demura. Did you ever
Mm-hmm.
get a chance to work with him?
Yeah, I got a chance. You ever heard of a guy by the name of Bong Yu?
Vaguely.
Yeah, Bong Yu. Oh, he was top competitor back in the day. Bong Yu. And Bong Yu was, I guess Bong Yu was Korean, I would think. But Bong Yu and I came on, and I remember us being at one of the tournaments. I don't know whether it was a 4-season tournament. It was actually a Japanese village tournament. And Bong Yu, and we were both down getting ready to go up, and I have two guys meet each other, and you go, man, all I want to do is if I could just win one match, I'll be happy. That's when we were just starting our careers, right? And overnight, Bong Yu became a big star. But we fought at Japanese Village, and I beat Bong Yu at Japanese Village in our first fight. And he went on to become a massive martial arts star. Really, really, really good. But
The reason I bring up Mr. Demura is that by the, obviously the Bruce Lee craze, the late 60s into the early 70s, his tragic passing. Then we had nothing but the cult movies and such. But it was like 10 years later that a movie came out, and it's here 30, almost 40 years later. We're looking at The Karate Kid. The Karate Kid. And Mr. Demura was the actual stunt double for Pat Morita in the movie. That's why I'm at. So I'm going to think that there was this big craze with The Karate Kid, because in the 80s was my time.
Yeah.
And that should have been something of very great interest, I would think.
It was too.
Publications.
When Mito produced a series of martial arts expos, and Mr. Demura was a big part of that. So I remember him coming up to the magazine, and he was just absolutely amazing. And I think he got a contract with Japanese Village. I don't know if did you ever go to Japanese Village?
No, sir.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, I did. Yes, as a kid. Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And they were putting on some of the first, and displays of martial arts. But yes, I know him. I know Mr. Demura, and also Mr. Yamashita. Do you know Mr. Yamashita as well?
Yes, sir.
Another one.
I've met all these people briefly. Most of my contact with a lot of today's martial artists and some of our seniors has been through the internationals. Sadly, after Mr. Parker's passing, my time at the internationals was
we did a lot of books with Mr. Demura. He did a book on nunchuck. He did a book on. Guess who put those books together?
You're going to tell me.
It would be me.
So tell us. Inquiring minds would love to know about these books.
Yeah.
Stop there. Stop there for a second. I need you to sit up or turn a little bit so I don't lose you. Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. Better. Okay, go ahead. Pick it up from right there. So tell us about these books.
So these books, O'Hara Publication did more than just magazine. They also did martial arts books. And part of my job was I got my own office and my own window by the big, there's like if you're a beginning artist or a production artist, you're out in the galley with it, you have 3 or 4 artists out there. But once you get a note and you're pretty good, you get an office with a door and a window, and you can close the door and lock it and lock yourself in and talk on the phone and do other stuff, but so John and I had offices, and funny stories. And anyway, Mr. Demura, different would have to come up because they would have to explain. I mean, you can look at photographs of the way things are done, of, A, B, C, D, but maybe a photograph is going the wrong way. What did he do? Did he turn completely around backwards to do this move or what? So you would have to call him up and say, is this? They go, oh, no, 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 no. That goes down here. This goes here. We need to shoot another, so that a lot of that was going on about people who did, and only the best martial artists, the most famous ones did books anyway. But I put a lot of those books together.
How many series of books were you involved with? I mean, obviously you said many, but I mean, which ones stand out in your mind, sir?
Oh, I got a story for you. I'm giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I remember after I'd been there when I first started for a first little bit, I thought I was doing pretty good. And Dick Hennessy called me into his office, and he goes, Jerry, he goes, what? He goes, hey, here is this issue of Karate Illustrated, because you would be given a magazine, or you would be given a black belt or Karate Illustrated or Stars in Sports or whatever, and he would say, take a look at it and tell me how you like it, And this was a finish. Magazines usually go through different. There's a blue line and a brown line, so there's many stages for corrections to be made before it actually gets printed. And evidently, it's your magazine and you're responsible for it. So I evidently sent something out without it being blue line, and there were corrections that got printed, and I will never forget this as long as I live. And so he didn't call me in and just jump on me and get mad at me. He called me in and he put the magazine. I said, look through the magazine and tell me how you like it. But so when I got the magazine, I looked through, and he had outlined where all the mistakes were. That Photoshop should have been flopped. The story should be flowing into this direction. He would tell me, and I'm going. I just slowly started to die in his office in the chair. And he said, "Okay, that's okay. I just wanted you to, go over it with you."
When was this? What year was this, sir?
This had to be in probably the early 70s.
Do you remember what issue this was and what story?
No, and I'm not going to tell you what issue it was.
Because we're all going to go look at it, right?
So look,
you're going to feel pain now, all these years later.
So I remember I was so stressed out about it. I was driving home, driving down Wilshire Boulevard in the Wilshire district, where they have all the magazine racks. And I swear to you, Paul, I'm in my car, but I could see every issue of Black Belt magazine from halfway across the street in the left lane. I wanted to go buy every copy and just hide it.
I bet you did. I bet you thought of it and you were going to. So you realize, oh my gosh. What is the most, out of all the articles and books, take top 3 that really stand out, that really may not have been maybe the most popular or most successful, but in your mind, the 3 that stood out to you in your personal journey with
I would have to say that it would, and it's going to sound kind of selfish, but I have to say, Mito could never understand, because he was Bruce Lee's student, right? I was Joe Louis' student, and Mito only knew like a couple of things that he would always try to be shown off. Look at this, I can do. And I'm going, no, Mito, you do it this way. You relax. It's a hyperextension. Hand moves before the body. Hand moves before the. So he's looking at me, and some kind of way he found out that I was studying with Joe, and that Joe was studying with Bruce, and he did not want. He couldn't, he's proud. He cannot have Joe Louis come and do an article on the 25 basic fighting principles, but he could have me do it. He found out. So I did one of the longest articles in Black Belt magazine on the 25 basic fighting principles: independent movement, broken rhythm, angles of cancellation, all of that. And he had never ever given the okay for anybody to do an article more than 3 or 4 pages. And I think that one was probably about 8, and that was the first in Black.
Wow,
So
congratulations.
that stands out for me. Yeah.
So let's move on from your time at Black Belt Magazine. And you had mentioned earlier you'd had a meeting with Mr. Saxon. And you came up, and there was a couple of TV series that you were involved with.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about them right now. One of them is ABC's I Am Somebody.
Oh, yeah. Well, by this time.
And NBC's 13-week series called The Secrets of Martial Arts Learned, starring John Saxton, co-hosted by Jerry Smith.
Oh, but let me tell you, man. Let me tell you. What happened was.
Which one are you talking about, first of all? In general?
First one, but I'll talk about I Am Somebody first.
Okay.
Cliff Stewart had graduated from UCLA with a degree in film, and he was hired at NBC they did a show that came on every Sunday called I Am Somebody. And on that show, they had Gloria Hendry, they had Barney Casey, they had Jim Kelly. They had it was a public one of those shows. But so Cliff said, Jerry, I go, yeah. Because Cliff and I opened up West Philly Karate Institute. He said, we want to do a show with the 3 top Black martial artists, and it sounds funny to say it that way. The 3 popular, just say 3 popular Black martial artists on the West Coast, and we want it to be Steve Muhammad, you, and Jim Kelly. And it'll be easy for us to do it because all 3 of you do different things. Steve does his Kenpo, Kelly does Okinawan or whatever he does, and you do full contact. He said, so that's perfect. He said, so we proceeded. But Kelly, this is at the time when Kelly had did a couple of movies, and he goes, no. I don't want to be in this with these other guys. Just do it on me, and or I won't do it. So Cliff told him to go to hell, and he got one of Mr. Bong Soo-han's student, Hugh Van Putten, who was amazing. And so we did the show, and the show was really I got called out on the show, though. I got called out on the show because I did full contact. And if you look at the beginning of Enter the Dragon, by the way, there's a scene in Enter the Dragon where they go into the BKF school.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Go ahead.
As the camera comes across, that's me.
Did you turn and smile at the camera instead of just blocking and punching? You were going this? Did you just slow going?
No, I did not.
That's in the outtake, right?
Yeah. But what happened was, let me see, where was I?
You were talking about the school, and that few seconds actually catapulted you in the minds of the martial artists out there. You're very recognizable.
Yeah. It was great. It was a great. Who knew at that particular time that movie would become probably the greatest martial arts movie ever made, and to this day, probably still is. Well,
it is the standard. I mean, it's very real, and it introduces so many things that we take for granted today. With mixed martial arts, grappling, the different sparring, the different backgrounds.
Well,
you see everybody there, and the fight scenes are very real.
That leads me into John Saxon.
Yes.
So I get a call from, I'm trying to think of his name, the producer, John. His kids studied at my school on Saturdays. And we get a call at Black Belt Magazine that that they want to do. NBC wants to do a show called Secrets of the Martial Arts. They're going to bring people from all over the world, from Japan, ninjas, everything, and that if I would be technical advisor for the movie, since I knew everybody. They go, Jerry knows everybody. He can help you guys put it together. So I was hired as technical advisor. Joe Lewis was supposed to be originally have the position that I assumed. Joe Lewis and John Saxon. And Joe didn't show up. Joe was kind of famous for that from time to time. And since I was working on the show, they said, Jerry, we want you, you're going to take Joe's place. And I'm going, what? But I'm not an actor. They go, no, you look great. We've been watching you. You look great. You're going to be the, so I was hired as the second. Now, what's interesting is I said, I know John Saxon. They go, really? I go, yeah. I go, when I was a kid, he took me home, gave me a ride home. And they brought John in, and John Saxon remembered me. Only problem was, John was still a brown belt after all those years, and I was a black belt. Now, when I worked out with him years earlier, I was a green belt, he was a brown belt. And he goes, oh, I see you got your black belt. And I go, yeah. But anyway, it was a wonderful show. I got a chance it was kind of like an 8-week deal. It's out there somewhere, man, out there. And
probably on YouTube, to be honest.
Yeah, we had everybody on. We had Mike Stone, Chuck Norris, Ed Parker, and I had to sit there and interview them, and talk about, and that was really a blast for me.
Well, then, okay, I'm going to hit you up on that right now, just in a sentence or two. Tell us what it's like to interview Mike Stone.
Well, it wasn't like your interview, because we had all these other people there too, and it was, I don't remember him standing out the way he did on your interview, because it was about him. There, it was about, I remember Mr. Parker, I remember Chuck Norris and Mike Stone. They were on. We're sitting in these chairs, and I'm got my series of questions that I'm asking them, and it worked really.
So how was the demeanor of Mr. Norris?
Oh, I love him, man. He is the nicest guy that you could ever. It's almost like he couldn't possibly be that nice. I mean, he just it's weird. I remember when I was I had a fighter, Jimmy Colas, that was won. They had a fight off from all over the country, and my fighter won to meet Bill Wallace for the middleweight championship of the world in Vegas. It was the UFC fight back then. That was the top fight, and Chuck, at the fight off, Chuck said, Jerry. I go, yeah. I knew Chuck, and I had met him. He goes, I want to take you out to lunch today. I got something I want to talk to you about. So I went, okay, but I'm a trainer, man. I'm totally into my, I couldn't focus in on what Chuck was saying, but I went out to lunch with him. He bought me lunch. He says, look, Jerry, this may be the second or third movie that he made. I'm not sure. I think it was called Good Guys Wear Black. And he said, look, I got the script, man. And he says, I got a part that I think would be perfect for you if you would, but I wasn't really paying a lot of attention, because I'm thinking that my fighter had one more fight, and then he gets to fight Bill Wallace in Vegas. And so I wasn't focusing in, but he was telling me about it and how he thought it was about these three guys that were in the military. And since he was in the military and I was in the military, I would be perfect for it. And but I didn't focus. I never called him back. I got back to him or anything. And later on, the movie comes out. And I think Donnie Williams ended up getting that part that I would have gotten if I had just paid attention to it,
Well,
And
that wasn't your path at that time, you know,
yeah,
and
but
that's something that's really important.
but Chuck is one of the nicest men that I've ever met in my life. He's truly a really nice person.
How about Mr. Parker, Ed Parker from the Kempo world? What was your interaction with him?
Well, I love him because we bonded. We bonded together. It was at the Elks Lodge. Bruce Lee was at the Elks Lodge. Johnny Timodat was fighting Joe. And it wasn't like a regular tournament because they were fighting on a platform, like a stage and the lodge. And everybody came. And I was way back. There was a bunch of empty seats way back up. And Mr. Parker came. I don't know why he came up there, but he came up there. He knew me from Black Belt Magazine because he would come up all the time. And he goes, Jetty. He goes, Jetty. I go, yeah. He goes, you really like martial arts, don't you? I go, yeah, Mr. Parker, I do. And I remember just snapped in my head that Ed Parker was the first person that I ever actually seen do martial arts. And I said, Mr. Parker, you want to know something? He goes, what? I said, I got something to tell you. You ain't going to believe this. I go, what? Because he asked me about where I came from. And I told him, little kid from Louisiana, Bayou, that came to. And he said, you made it all the way to Black. I go, yeah. And now you work for Black Belt Magazine. He thought that was really kind of interesting. But he was, we started to talk. And he says, and once I explained to him how it was segregated, how tough it was, he said, Jerry, I got something to show you. You go, what? He takes off these golden glasses, and at the center of the glasses where they connect both sides, that was a cutout of EP, but the glasses were solid gold. And he says, what do you think that stands for? I said, I know what it stands for, Mr. Parker. It stands for Ed Parker. And he says, well, look at this ring. What does that say? I said, that's EP. That's Ed Parker, of course. He says, no, no, no. That's Elvis Presley. He goes, Elvis Presley is one of my students, and he gave me these as a gift. And and so at that point, we became like kids. He was telling me, he said, you know, Jerry, I'm Mormon, and I went to Brigham Young, and he said, I was island boy. And he said, I had the same thing happen to me. He said, he was just saying that that he was discriminated against when he went to college in Brigham. And from that point on, knowing me from Black Belt Magazine, and whenever I went to one of his tournaments, he would just treat me very special and very nice. And I love him for that.
Thank you for sharing that. Hold on for just a few seconds here.
I'm ready.
Are you ready, sir? Grandmaster Smith, you are going to see something very unique. I, for many years, worked with the late Dennis Roberts and Hans Wiebig. Both those gentlemen created a company in Hollywood called Opti Boutique.
Mm-hmm.
Opti Boutique was premised off of celebrity sunglasses and glasses. Mm-hmm. One of the first ones that ever made something for was Sonny and Cher, and they used them in their artwork. Mm-hmm. I, on the other hand, knew them through stage work and such, and I was lucky enough to know them, to know this here. Now, this display here has in it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pairs of glasses, and that does not include something very special. These glasses here were, I can get it. There you go. These glasses here are famous because they saw a guy named Elvis Presley driving down Sunset Boulevard. Mm-hmm. And as a result, go to gallery view. They met him. They invited him to come into their store. Mm-hmm. About a week goes by. Elvis walks in with a bunch of his entourage. They said, Elvis, you need glasses. He goes, oh, yeah, really? What kind of glasses? Says, so they took the famous Taking Care of Business in a Flash
Oh my goodness.
that you're seeing right there that says TCB
Uh-huh.
on it in a flash. And there are the EPs that you're talking about that Mr. Parker had.
When I try to describe this to people, I never know that they know what you just showed here. I never know that they know what I'm talking about, where the cutout, that these are the glasses.
These are what Mr. Parker had on display in his house. He had two pairs of those, gold. And in my case, he also had them later with the two-tone, where he'd have them where there was silver, the silver with the gold on it. And in this, you have these are gold with the diamonds in the EP.
Oh,
And it's funny
wow.
that you have that. So I wanted to share that with you. It doesn't make me a better person. It just means I'm a much more enriched person, knowing people like Ed Parker, knowing you and everybody else that we've had a conversation with, because experiences are wonderful to share. Those are what I call perfect moments. Like right now, this is a perfect moment sharing with you. So you've been around, you've been involved in the martial arts, you were a competitor, a world champion. Then you went on to do and formulate the BKF with other gentlemen. You were a black belt magazine, influential individual with so many publications out there. And then you created your own system that you're the grandmaster of it. This all leads us to the conclusion of your influences. And then later on, your work in the Hollywood or the movie industry, working with very famous celebrities. Obviously, you've met some great people that have influenced us. I'm more interested in the martial arts people because they're real. They're real. They're hardworking people. They know what it's like to get punched. They know what it's like to get kicked. They know what it's like to really feel it. And that's really important. But sometimes because of that, the entertainment world wants you to protect them. So walk us through some of the people that you have worked with. And I think that would be important to hear.
Well, I worked for Helen Reddy. Her husband, Jeff Wall, had an office at the William Morris building. And he was one of those super agents. He managed the Flip Wilson, the Eagle. Is it the Eagles? Yeah. I mean, it's just a Sylvester Stallone, a bunch of people. And it's funny. Where I got the job working for Helen is it had to do with the Manson family. I don't know if you know it or not, but Helen was on that list that now there's a movie out about, but her name happened to be on the list. So Jeff Wall asked the people if he knew, and anyway, my name came up. So I worked for Helen for a couple of years, and but during that time, he probably introduced me to the most famous person I don't know if you know. You ever heard of Frank Gehry?
No, sir.
Frank
Wait,
Gehry.
no, Frank Gehry was a singer, wasn't he?
No. Frank Gehry is an architect.
Okay.
And he's a national treasure, considered a national treasure here in this country. And Frank Gehry, I used to live over in South Central LA. And all these people would come, Frank Gehry, Joe Lewis, all these different martial artists were coming. Because once I closed West LA Karate Institute, I turned my garage into a home gym, a really nice one, and Joe Lewis. So I won't say LAPD, but the sheriff's department, I had a student that was a sheriff, and he goes, Jerry, he goes, what? He goes, I was called in today. They wanted to know who all these people, they're watching. You ever see a car parked there and over there? I go, yeah, I do. And he said, I was called in and they wanted to know why all these people are going into your house. Are you doing drugs or what? He said, no, I explained to them that you were one of the good guys, that you weren't. So Frank Gehry, who designed that whenever they show pictures of Australia and the Opera House, Frank Gehry designed that, plus a whole
Okay.
bunch of other things. Very, very famous. And this little old man, Frank Gehry, would come over in South Central LA, and one of the most inquisitive, amazing geniuses I've ever met. And and then I go back to the beginning of why I started my quest, but you see where my quest led me. Now, one of the people that Mr. Wall, he called me up. I was an art director by this time for a different company, and told me that he had chosen me to. He said John Lennon has been murdered in New York. Ringo Starr is coming to Hollywood, working on a movie called The Caveman with Barbara Bach. And he goes, he says, we want you to be with him because you're going to be in the house. You're going to be in the house with the family. You're not going to be. This is not like being at a concert. You're going to be living with them for a month, in Beverly Hills. And I remember I was kind of like, I have a job. I finally got my dream job. I'm an art director for a company, for a small company. And I remember my boss, who was an old hippie, he heard me talking on the phone, and all of a sudden he's just waving his hands and going, say yes, say yes, say yes, you can do it. And I said, yeah. He said, Jerry, we can let you go you can be gone for a month. He said, just do one thing, get me Ringo's autograph, if you would. And I said, okay. So I remember putting on my tallest boots and my biggest coat because I wanted to look big. But what I didn't understand, Paul, that they chose me because I wasn't big and that I did blend in and I didn't look like what you would normally see as a bodyguard. And so I was with him for a month, with him and Barbara. And it was just, and I've never in my life been treated so nice because they treated me like a family. When it was dinner time, Jerry, time for dinner, come on. And then he would be having a conversation with somebody, he didn't care who it was. If he would turn to Jerry, what do you think about that? I mean, and he wasn't putting out, it was just the way, I think it was when they had went to India and came back. So they were very, very, it was just the most wonderful experience. Now you have to understand, Paul, that Jeff Wall, Helen's husband, was paying me to do this. So I was already, being paid. So I was with him for 5 weeks, for 4 weeks. I think it was 4 weeks. But on the night before he was getting ready to go to Monaco, because that's where he lives, he called me in and said, Jerry, and I go, yeah. He goes, and a bunch of people were there. This was a party, some movie stars, all kind of people were there. He goes, I know, and he stopped the party and go, look, he would always do this and introduce me. This is my friend Jerry. Because Jerry's been, taking care of me and Barbara for the last 4 weeks, and he goes, I want to take care of him. And he goes, Jerry, I understand taxes. That's why I live in Monaco, because because in England the taxes are so high. He said, so I want to pay you in cash. And I go, no. I go, Ringo, Jeff Wall is paying me to do this. I'm already being paid. He says, he's paying you for whatever reason he's paying you, but I'm paying you because you are special to me and we really appreciate what you've done. He gave me $5,000 cash, $5,000. And I remember leaving.
Man. Wow.
I remember leaving, Paul, and I was so nervous. I didn't know whether to put this money in my sock or in the trunk of my car or whatever. But that was a complete unique experience for me. It was wonderful.
Mr. Starr really is originally is Richard Starkey, but
you want to hear something interesting?
What's that?
You want something interesting? Barbara Bach, who also dated Joe Louis. I brought it up once, and I realized I probably shouldn't have done it. But
yeah,
one of her little boys, she has two little boys, and one of the boys called him Ringo. I just happened to be observing this. I wasn't involved, and I had him call the kid, and he said, "Come here, He goes, listen, I'm married to your mother. He goes, don't ever, ever call me Ringo again. My name is Richard.
Yes.
You call me. He said, that's someone, that's what I do. But you call me. He was telling the kid that personally, he never wanted him to call him that. And this is a little thing that I'm throwing it because it was so odd. I just remember watching.
He's a wonderful man. He's a very, here's a picture of me and him when we did the, see if I can get this right. There he is when he put his hands in the cement in Las Vegas. And that handprint, my friend, is down on Fremont Street in Las Vegas. And we have it there. And then that was the day I was with him at the sign, and we made it officially.
That's absolutely great. That's absolutely great.
And I have other pictures
I
of him. He's a wonderful guy. He really is.
They sent me to the airport with a private jet to pick him, Barbara, and his manager up and go back to Bel Air where he was staying. And some producer that was in Europe gave him his house for a month. And I lived in it with him. And I've worked with people from Motown. I've worked with a lot of really, really neat people. No one has ever treated me the way that I will never, ever, ever forget how nice, not to mention the money was. He didn't have to do that, but he did.
Well, that's, when a person's confident in themselves and they understand that they've walked from that path, if you know anything about his history, you'll understand how appreciative he really is. And he has had the blessings of his talent, and people, it came to be as they say. So you've worked with Saxton, you've worked with, Bob Wall, you've done things with Bruce Lee, you've done things with Richard Starkey, better known as Ringo Starr. You've also had relationships, obviously, with Helen Reddy and other people. At the conclusion, I guess what I'm going to ask you is something simple. Originally, you learned from your traditional training in Okinawa that, all war is based on deception. And you learn that, not to reveal yourself. But you can reveal yourself to these people because later on, as an instructor and as a teacher, some of the greats that you've had the pleasure to teach. One of them is my favorite guy, Cecil Peoples. I love Cecil, and he's a wonderful guy. He's genuine. I call him Mr. Smiles. He comes in, he's just happy. He's a great guy.
I just love him because there's nobody else like him. And he was an incredible competitor. And I wrote about him once, and I was saying that somewhere in a storage unit, there's probably 500 trophies that he won as a brown belt. As a matter of fact, the brown belt in his division was happy when he went to black belt because Cecil completely ruled.
Well, the point I'm sharing with you is that on your journey, I'm going to take a quote from somebody and he wrote this about two things. One, as you become now a teacher for others, he said, teaching requires a sensitive mind with great flexibility. Teaching requires a sensitive mind with great flexibility. I think you're in tune with yourself. There's no question. And your ability to adapt. But the final thing is, he said, truth is a pathless road. Truth is a pathless road, a road that is not a road. It is a total expression that has no before or after. Those are the words and writings of Bruce Lee.
Oh my goodness.
Tell us about your path. What is the truth that you finally have tried to see?
My truth is, something happened to me when I was a kid that was a very young guy from a family that was filled with love. I mean, I was completely just a loving little boy. Punching, fighting, striking was the farthest thing away from me. But something happened, and I told you what happened to me. And that led me on a quest. That quest took me to Southeast Asia, and to Japan and Okinawa. And I became a champion. And I fought some of the best, around in my day. But I realize now, looking back on the people that I've met and the people that I know, and this incredible experience that I've been on, that there must have been a reason for it. There might, would my life have been different completely if if the horrible thing had not happened to me? So, and I think that love is the glue that holds the universe together. And I think that what I have learned and the people that I've met, I'm a very, very, very lucky guy. I mean, seriously, I'm, nothing but roses. I've got a wonderful retirement. I retired with a degree in education, and it's so funny because my degree is in design, and but I worked as a teacher, taught high school, adult education, and also taught on the college level. Taught teachers in satellite units in University UC San Diego. So it seems like, so I came to the conclusion that I was a better teacher than I was at anything else. Being able to take information in, process it, and give it, and because there are different learning styles. And once you learn that everyone has different learning styles, this is what it goes back to the way that Joe taught me. What he taught me was so clear that it affected everything else that I did. So when I became a teacher, I would look at what was given me, and then I would process it, and then I would teach to the students and make it much easier for them. And that was my gift. So I'm lucky, man. I got nothing but I end all my quotes with there's nothing but love. Jerry Smith, nothing but love.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's quite clear, teacher, that you gave us a lesson that is immeasurable. And thank you for everything you have done, your contributions, your experiences, sharing those perfect moments, your service for this country, the influence you've had on young minds, and you continue to do that today. So, Grandmaster Smith, on behalf of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, thank you so much. I hope everything continues to be nothing but love for you, sir.
Paul, thank you. No one else could have done this and got this out of me but you. I want you to know that.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.